Consistency is the spark that generates momentum. Wherever you are in your life right now, whether you're talking about your finances, your health and fitness and wellness, your relationship, are dictated by decisions and actions and behaviors that you made 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago. Whatever I'm going to use to define success is in perfect alignment with my vision for the future, with the person that I'm trying to become. It's in perfect alignment with my core values and my standards. And basketball is a momentum game. Business is a momentum game. Life is a momentum game. And our goal is to try to generate as much momentum as we possibly can. Consistency is a controllable superpower. It's one that all of us have the ability to develop and to hone and to improve. And I also find consistency not only to be one of the most effective traits for improved performance and productivity and output and even fulfillment, but it's one that we all can work that muscle. It's available to all of us. And anytime there is a superpower that can make a huge difference in every area of our life that we have control over, that's something we need to double down on. I also think that consistency, especially over long periods of time, is one of the most impressive traits. And as I look at my own life, I'm proud to say, but I say this with all humility, that there are certain areas of my life where I have been really consistent. And I don't just mean for months or even years. There's some areas of my life I have been unbelievably consistent for decades. And I get great results in those areas. But that I can also say with huge humility, a tremendous amount of humility, there are some areas in my life where I haven't been very consistent. And to no surprise and to no coincidence, the areas that I haven't been very consistent are the areas of my life that I've most struggled with or that I've really underperformed in. So to me, consistency is something that all of us should be aiming to improve in the most important areas of our life. So first, let's just even take a look, at consistency. What is consistency? I look at consistency is showing up every day. Now, showing up can mean a variety of different things. And in today's day and age, showing up can even mean showing up virtually. It doesn't have to just be in person. But what it means is showing up as your best self, regardless of how you feel, regardless of whether or not it's convenient, regardless of whether or not you want to. When I mentioned that there's been some areas in my life that I've been very consistent, and working out is one of those areas. I still identify, even though I'm almost 50 years old, I still identify as being an athlete. I was technically only an athlete playing basketball up through college, but I've always identified as an athlete. And as an athlete, I've always taken my training and my working out very seriously. And I've tried to be ultra consistent. I can't remember a time that I've missed several workouts or I've taken just a tremendous amount of time off, unless it was something intentional to recover from an injury, to heal and recover maybe after an event. But that's all been part of a strategy. Working out has been in the fabric of what it is that I do ever since I was a teenager. And as I said, there's some other areas that's not true, but for working out, it is. And the reason I say that, though, is in any given calendar year, and I actually keep statistics and I keep logs of workouts in my iPhone. I believe in 2024, I worked out 250 times. So 250 out of the 365 days. And those off days were intentional off days. They were intentional rest days to recover from the workout. But the reason I bring that up is of the 250 days that I worked out, honestly, I probably only felt like working out, I don't know, maybe half of those. 125 days, I was excited to head to the gym and excited to work out. The other 125 days, I didn't necessarily feel like working out. I didn't necessarily want to. It might not even have been convenient for that day's schedule, but I still had the discipline to show up. I still had the discipline to build that consistency muscle. So that's really how I view consistency. And how do we improve consistency, or how do we become consistent? I believe it's this concept that I had first heard from Ben Newman, who used to work with Nick Saban back when he was coaching at Alabama. And there was a saying that Nick Saban would always say, standards over feelings. Standards over feelings, that you play to a standard, you don't play to how you feel. You treat others in relationships based on a standard, not on how you feel in that moment or what your mood is. And I look at consistency the same way. If you want to become consistent, then you need to make decisions and you need to plan your day and build your schedule around a standard. You need to do it around your core values. You need to do it around what you believe, because those things will be constant. If you only do things when you're in the mood or when you feel like it or when you want to, well, that by definition is going to become very inconsistent, because as human beings, our emotions always ebb and flow. Our level of motivation always ebbs and flows. Our schedule and what's convenient is going to ebb and flow. So the most important part of being consistent is making decisions that are in alignment with your standards, your core values, and your beliefs. That you make decisions based on the person you're trying to become, not how you feel in the moment. And if you can learn to do that, then you will definitely become consistent. The way I look at success, for me personally, is the degree at which I'm living the quality of life that I want to live. You know, as you can see, I've got some ink on my arms, and one of the tattoos I have on my left arm says, live the life you love and love the life you live. And ultimately, that's how I define my own success. How congruent am I with living a life that I love and loving a life that I live? And for me, that means my ultimate goal, my ultimate North Star, and ultimately my definition of success boils down to what I just call quality of life. You know, how well am I living a high quality of life? Now, of course, that's also subjective. What you consider a high quality of life might be different than how I define it, might be different than how someone else defines it, and that's okay. All of these things are things that we need to define for ourselves. So for me personally, when I'm looking at the quality of my life, I have it broken down into 4 pillars. And the degree at which I am living my life and making decisions and spending my time and placing my attention and pouring my heart and soul and love into these 4 components, the degree at which I'm doing that defines whether or not I'm living a high quality of life. And when I am checking these 4 pillars off on a very consistent basis, and I'm living my true, genuine, authentic life, then it is a high quality of life, and I consider myself successful. And those 4 pillars, first is, we'll just call my well-being. That's going to include my physical, my mental, my emotional, and my relational health. You know, am I able to move my body? Do I have time and stillness to think? Am I taking care of my mental wellness? Am I eating clean? Am I getting sleep? Am I doing physical activities that I enjoy doing? You know, so that's just kind of under the pillar of wellness. The second pillar are my relationships. Starting from the inside out, the relationships I have with my children. As many of you know, I'm divorced, so I only have my kids half of the time, but I'm a father and I have a relationship with my kids all of the time. So how well am I forging a more connected relationship with my now teenage children? Also in that, concentric circles are my family and my friends and the people that I work with, the clients that I serve, that group of people. What am I doing to fight for friendship, to work hard to develop and forge those relationships? One of the commitments I made just under 2 years ago now was several of my best male friends do not live in the DC area where I live. They live all over the country, and I don't get to see them as often as we would all like. And often that means we can fall out of touch. Sometimes there's the facade of social media where you're kind of following your friends on Instagram and Facebook, and you think you know what's going on in their lives, and we kind of just put that on cruise control. But it's more important to actually have meaningful and deep conversations, to really engage, to just know them on a surface level, to follow what they're doing online is not really going to deepen our friendship or our relationship. So I heard a quote just under 2 years ago that said, especially men, we need to fight for friendship with our other male friends. So I have a group of 5 different friends that I do a 30-minute Zoom call with once a month. We call them our monthly man meetings. And really, we don't spend any time talking about work. We don't really spend a ton of time talking about, kind of personal and professional development. Sometimes that stuff comes up if that's what's on our heart, but we try to spend most of those 30 minutes just talking about life, to talk, celebrating the wins that we've had, talking about some of the adversities and challenges, talking about marriages and significant others and raising children and, fitness goals and things like that. And I've really found that making that time, and it's very reasonable. I can certainly carve out 30 minutes for each of 5 friends once a month. That's 2.5 hours a month. But when you start to stack months, you'll see that it's really a great connective tissue to fight for those friendships. So that's the second pillar is going to be relationships. The third pillar, which is really important to my quality of life, is my craft, is getting better at what it is that I do for a living. I don't consider being a keynote speaker a job. I very much consider it a calling. I feel a tremendous amount of purpose in the work that I do. And I want to get really good at the craft of professional speaking. So I spend a lot of time working on that craft, and, encompassing the craft of being on stage and speaking is the ability to write. So I spend a lot of time in deep thought, a lot of time writing, a lot of time being a guest on other people's podcasts, because it's a great opportunity to practice the skill set of articulating my perspective and my philosophy. So I spend a lot of time working on my craft. I mean, certainly there's the business side, there's the marketing side, there's the building relationship side, to try and get on more stages. But for me, I get a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of trying new material, out of the rehearsal process, I very much approach the speaking game as if I was still an athlete. I look at a keynote as my game, and I have a pre-game routine that starts the night before. I'm very systematic and ritualized in the way that I travel and what I do the morning of a keynote. And I really want to get good at that craft, because, as I said, as much as I enjoy the craft of speaking, I find it to be meaningful work, purposeful work. Like I sincerely hope with every ounce of my being that the stuff that I share from stage is helping people improve their lives, not just their businesses, but their lives in general. And that is incredibly meaningful work. And the better I can get at my craft, then the more stages I'll have an opportunity to speak on, and bigger stages that I'll have an opportunity to speak on, which means I can reach more people. And that's really, really important to me. And then the fourth pillar of how I would define a high quality of life comes down to life experiences. I don't get me wrong, I like nice things. I've always liked nice things and name brands. But several years ago, I kind of started moving towards this minimalist movement. And outside of a lot of the knickknacks that you can see on my office shelves behind me, if you were to go through the other rooms in my apartment, I don't really have much stuff. I'm less inclined to put my money into material items now as I am to put them into what I'll just call experiences. A lot of those experiences revolve around travel. A lot of those experiences revolve around really good food, because I love food. But a lot of those experiences for me are things that I put on my calendar that I look forward to. Things that for me, I have to physically and mentally train for and prepare for. And I've done a whole bunch of experiences over the last several years, without even looking in the rearview mirror, just looking ahead. In 2 weeks, I'm going to check off of the bucket list item that I've had for almost a decade and participate in the Coach K Academy, which is a fantasy basketball camp down at Duke for guys 35 years and older who still want to play some basketball. And this is something I've wanted to do, like I said, for almost a decade. And I'm finally going to, treat myself to doing it as an early 50th birthday present. But that's something that's coming up in 2 weeks. And I've been spending the last 4 months training and playing and shooting and preparing to show up as my best self for this camp. And then when the camp's over, I'm going to find something this fall that I really want to train for and to dive into. But if I fast forward a little further, in January of 2026, for my 50th birthday, a good friend of mine named Rick Simmons has organized a leadership cohort, and we are going to hike Kilimanjaro, which is the highest mountain in Africa. It'll be a 10-day excursion. It'll be unlike anything I've ever done before. And that's how I'm going to choose to celebrate my 50th birthday, which, by the way, for those of you keeping score at home, I consider turning 50 to be the halftime of my life. I have the optimism, and some would say the delusion, to believe that I'm going to live to 100. And I consider 50 simply the halfway mark. And my goal is to make my next 50 my best 50. And the way that I'll do that is by certainly applying all of the lessons that I've learned during the first 50 years of my life. But more importantly, is for these next 50 is really honing in on living the highest quality of life I can and paying attention to those 4 pillars. So once again, I want to pay attention to my wellness, my physical, my mental, my emotional wellness. I want to pay attention to my relationships with my kids, my family, my friends, my clients. I want to pay close attention to the experiences that I'm having in life. I want to make sure I've always got something on the calendar that I'm excited about. And I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to pouring into my craft and becoming the best speaker that I'm capable of becoming. So when I'm in the zone, when I'm in the flow, when I'm in the pocket, that means most of the time, most of my faculties, energy, and attention are being poured into those 4 areas. And when those 4 things are all grooving and creating some momentum, that is how I define living a successful life. Now, with that said, some of these other external metrics that society in general uses to measure success, social media followers, number of books sold, money made, speaking revenue from stage, these are all things that I'm not saying they're not important. And I'm certainly not saying that I don't have preferences. Would I prefer to have 100,000 more YouTube subscribers than I currently have? Absolutely. I've got a brand new book called Next Play that's coming out this November. Would I prefer for that to be a New York Times bestseller over not? Yes, absolutely. Would I prefer for that book to sell hundreds of thousands of copies? Absolutely. That would be my preference. But those things don't define my success. And I'm working really hard, and I still have some work to do to not let those external metrics define my happiness or my fulfillment as well. Would those be nice to haves? Absolutely. Are they prerequisites and requirements and necessities to me living a happy, fulfilled, significant life? Absolutely not. So I just want to make sure that I make that distinction between preferences of external validation, external metrics, and what I actually need to live a wonderful life. And when I say that I plan to make the next 50 my best 50, I really mean that. And I've said that to some folks before, and many of them have said, oh, I don't want to live to 100. That'd be way too long. And I think it's because they have a slightly different reference point. I want to make it crystal clear that I only want to live to 100 if I'm living a vivacious and vital life. Like when I say live to 100, granted, I probably won't be doing the K Academy when I'm 100, but I still want to have physical capabilities to move around and get, do things on my own. I certainly want to have the mental and emotional faculties to be sharp and to be present. So I'm not talking about just checking off a box of barely making it to 100 years old. I'm talking about 100 years of vivacious life. And I've been incredibly fortunate to live a pretty good first 50, but I'm confident that I can make the second 50 even better. And a few of the things that I'm very conscious of in order to do that, one is how I move my body and the nutrition that I follow. So for anyone that's interested, I'm going to share a few thoughts on the guidelines that I follow with my own nutrition, which for the last year has been really dialed in. And I certainly make the disclaimer, I am not a registered dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm just someone that is very interested in and does a lot of reading, watching, and listening on the subject. A year ago in March, I did hire a nutrition coach to help set me up with, a program I could follow. And I've been following it, to a T, for the last 16 months. I've seen my energy increase. I've seen my sleep improve. I've seen inflammation and my ability to recover from workouts improve. And certainly I've received some aesthetic benefits. I mean, this is the lowest my body fat has ever been as an adult. And for me, it's not that I'm following a specific diet. I just have a few guidelines, simple, basic guidelines. As you can see from the sign above my head, I like to simplify success. I like to focus on the fundamentals, and I like to get back to the basics. And I just focus on these handful of core nutrition principles 95% of the time. And the other 5%, those are for some cheat meals and giving myself permission to be less than perfect. But some of those guidelines that I choose to follow to make sure that I'm eating a diet that can sustain 100 years of a vital life. Number one is I do everything in my power to drastically minimize any processed foods. I try not to eat anything that comes in bags or boxes or can sit on shelves for long periods of time. I do the best I can to eat things with a minimal number of ingredients. Do you know the ingredients in a sweet potato? Yeah, it's just a sweet potato. Do you know if you go buy some sweet potato tater tots in the frozen food section, do you know the ingredients in those? No, and I don't either, but it's about a dozen of them, half of which I can't pronounce. So there's a difference. At face value, they both look like sweet potatoes, but they're not the exact same. So I'm doing the best I can to err on the side of eating a minimally processed food diet. I choose not to do any dairy, not to do any cheese. I don't do, I do an almond milk when I drink almond, for almond milk, but I try not to do breads, dairy, or cheese, as well as no processed foods. And that makes up most of it. I also try to make sure that I get 25 to 30 grams of protein with every meal. And because I'm in a heavy training phase right now, I'm eating 6, 7, sometimes 8 times a day. And these aren't little light snacks. They're usually small meals throughout the day. But I try to eat 25 to 30 grams of protein with each meal. And each meal will pair a protein, usually a lean protein, with either a carbohydrate, which will be oatmeal, white potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, or grits, or I pair a protein with a vegetable, or I pair a protein with a fat. Something like avocado or almonds. And then I actually eat a fairly significant amount of fruit, especially before and after workouts. And most of the fruit that I choose to consume are berries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, throw some bananas and some apples in there occasionally as well. And really the only thing I drink is water. My goal is to consume a gallon of water a day, and I try to do it by 2:00 so that I'm not up all night having to use the bathroom. And that's it. Those are kind of my handful of guidelines that I choose to follow from a nutrition standpoint. The other things that I'm doing to try and make sure that I can reach that 100-year mark is I've really been prioritizing sleep. That's the reason that I wear the Oura Ring, is to monitor sleep. I've got my sleep routine and my sleep rituals. I do the best I can not to eat any food within 2 to 3 hours of bedtime so that I've been fully digested. At night, if I'm watching TV, I change the settings so that it's on a dim setting instead of vivid, and I wear the Blu-ray blue blocking glasses. And yes, I know I look absolutely ridiculous, but that's okay. I don't mind that. I keep my apartment or my hotel room super cool, and I also keep my room as dark as I can get it. So there's no electronics in there or lights or anything flashing. And I try to put myself to bed at a very consistent time. Generally speaking, unless something else is going on, like a late flight, or occasionally I play basketball late on Sundays, I'm in bed by 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And then when that's the case, I naturally wake up refreshed and ready to attack the day at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. I very rarely have to set an alarm. Now, I know that's only going to work in the current setting that I'm in and in the season I'm in. I know that many of you watching or listening right now are in a different season of your life, and that doing the things that I'm sharing with you are simply not reasonable for you to do. And that is okay. But there are always different seasons, and I never want anyone to play the comparison game. I'm just sharing with you all what's currently working for me at this point in my life, that I'm hoping is going to enable me to live to 100. So I've covered nutrition. I've covered sleep. Another pillar of that certainly would be exercise. I try and move my body every single day. Now, because I'm in this training phase for the Coach K Academy, 2 mornings a week, I play basketball at 6 a.m. with a group of guys. But every other morning, I try and start my day with a 60-minute walk. Now that the weather is broken and it's nice outside here in the DC area, I can often do the 60-minute walk outside through the neighborhood and get some fresh air, which is awesome. If not, when it's colder or if it's raining, then I'll simply do an incline walk on a treadmill. But I try and start every day in a fasted state by doing a 60-minute walk. Then some days I'm playing basketball. Some days I'm doing the sauna. Some days I'm strength training. I try to strength train my upper body 2 to 3 times per week and my lower body once or twice. And you mix up all of that together, and I'm doing something fairly active most days of the week. But I do check in with myself. If a day comes up and I'm feeling sluggish, I'm feeling demotivated, I'm feeling sore, I give myself permission to take a day off, to rest my mind and body, and then really get after it and attack it the next day. Something else that I pay a lot of attention to as I'm attempting to live to 100 years old is my stress management. I try and make sure that I have downtime for thinking. I try and have times throughout the day where it's quiet and I can enjoy some stillness and some silence, some reflective periods. I really want to make sure that I'm constantly checking in with myself and working to increase my self-awareness. I give myself permission to feel however I'm going to feel. And you better believe I have a wide range of emotions just like anyone else. But what I've learned to do over time is not let how I'm feeling dictate how I'm behaving, not let how I'm feeling dictate how I'm showing up. And that's allowed me to be fairly consistent. So, those are the primary pillars of what I'm doing to make my next 50 my best 50. How our results are a lagging indicator of previous decisions, previous actions, previous behaviors of our process. And that there's always a gap between what we're doing in the moment and the results that we'll get. Wherever you are in your life, and I could mean that literally, but I'm talking more metaphorically. Wherever you are in your life right now, whether you're talking about your finances, your health and fitness and wellness, your relationship, your productivity or your performance at work, all of those things are dictated by decisions and actions and behaviors that you made 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago. There's a lag there. And what you're currently benefiting from or hopefully enjoying right now was based on decisions that you made a while ago. So of course, with that said, there has to be another side of that coin. That means the decisions and the actions and the behaviors that you're making today will determine who you'll be 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, and 3 years from now. And honestly, even 3 decades from now. So we just want to make sure that we're constantly in alignment with our decisions and our choices and our behaviors and our actions and our processes with who it is we're trying to become and where it is that we're trying to go. But I can't stress enough. There is always a gap between what you're doing and the outcome or the results that you want. You don't go to the gym tomorrow and then the following day you're rippling with muscles. No, you go to the gym every single day and put in the work and have the discipline to give an effort and to be intense and to be progressive. And then maybe 4, 6, 8 months later, you start to see some results. And then 4 to 6, 8 months after that, if you've been consistent and you've been disciplined, then you really start to reap the benefits. But it's only those who are willing to put in the work without seeing the immediate result, but are willing to do that consistently and exercise that discipline are the ones that are going to eventually have the outcome that they want. And as I look at my own life, this is true in my relationships. This is true certainly in my physical well-being, in my health. This is true financially. This is true even in my speaking business. I'm right now currently experiencing a little bit of momentum from a speaking standpoint. I'm incredibly grateful that I've landed a couple of speaking gigs in the last few days and very thankful for that. But those didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Those speaking engagements and offers are results of work that I put in 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago. It's with social content that I put out previously. It's with relationships that I built previously. It's with other engagements that I spoke at previously, who then were able to tell other people about it. So it's not like I did something last week and now I'm enjoying this influx of speaking inquiries. No, it's having the discipline and the consistency to put that work in when I wasn't seeing any benefit over and over. And that is basic in principle, but certainly never easy to do. It is really hard to put in work. Put in work to make good financial decisions. Put in work to make good decisions for your nutrition and your exercise. Put in, make good decisions with your relationships and plant those seeds. If you want to have a thriving marriage a year from today, well, then what you do today matters. The bricks you lay and the seeds you plant today are either voting for you having a thriving marriage a year from now, or they're eroding and detracting from that. So just know that on some level, we have an opportunity to build and create our own future based on the decisions that we're making today. But the concept that there's always a gap in between is something that I think a lot of people forget. Even building up a social following, or building up a YouTube channel, or building up a number of subscribers to a newsletter, or to your podcast, those things take time. You have to be willing to put in the reps when you're not seeing an immediate benefit, and then stick to it. Now, even this, case in point, this High Performance Huddle, LinkedIn Live that I'm doing, now I'll say truthfully, I'm not measuring the success of this based on how many people tune in or how many people watch. To be honest, that's almost irrelevant to me. Now, if you are watching right now, you are not irrelevant to me. I'm incredibly grateful that you take the time to pay attention right now. And I want to make sure this is worth your while, but that's not the sole reason for doing it. I mean, I'm doing it to be of service, and I'm doing it to be helpful, and I'm doing it to add value, but I'm not doing it so that I can have 100 or 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 people tune in. If those things happen, they happen, but that's not the reason for doing it. I'm very process oriented, and I'm doing this for reasons that I've explained on previous huddles. But I'm willing to show up every other Friday and do these recordings, whether anyone's watching or not. And I'm going to continue to put in the reps, and I'm going to make a commitment to stick with this. And then we'll see if the intended outcomes, actually come true. If someone were to ask me, what do I believe are the most important traits to being successful? There's probably a half a dozen or so, but the ones that immediately jump out, first is always going to be awareness. I believe awareness needs to be the first step, because you will never improve something you're unaware of, and you'll never fix something that you're oblivious to. So it's really, really important to have a high level of awareness. And as counterintuitive as it may sound, we increase our self-awareness by being more in tune with those around us, by having constant check-ins with the people that know us best, by insulating ourselves with a group of people that love us and care enough about us to hold us accountable, to help us see our blind spots, to help us bring up front the things that we might not be aware of. But it always starts with self-awareness. After self-awareness, I believe, is discipline, and discipline is making decisions in the moment that are most aligned with the person you're trying to become, and discipline is something that we do choose in the moment. It's not something that's preordained at birth. Discipline is not something that you either have or you don't. Now, you may have a history of not making very disciplined decisions in certain areas of your life, and you may try and use that as evidence as you're not a disciplined person. But every single one of us has the chance to make a more disciplined decision with everything we do in our life. I mean, the next meal you eat, you can choose to eat a more disciplined meal, in this case, a healthier meal, than not. You can choose how you invest your time and how you invest your attention. So just know that you have the power to choose. And when you start creating some momentum by making more consistent, disciplined choices, then you'll start to identify as a disciplined person. And that's why discipline and consistency are kind of cousins, if you will. It's not good enough just to make disciplined decisions every once in a while, every other Tuesday. We need to consistently make as many disciplined decisions as possible in order to reap the benefits of that. So that's kind of where consistency comes in. Another trait that I believe is vital to not only high performance and productivity, but is simply vital to our own fulfillment and happiness. And that is humility, and humility is not thinking less of yourself. Humility is thinking of yourself less. Humility is being open to feedback. Humility is being open to being coached. Humility is being open to the idea that no matter how good you are at something, you can still get better. Humility is acknowledging that the world doesn't revolve around me. I'm actually a part of the world. Humility is saying that what other people value is of equal importance to what I value, that what other people believe is of equal importance to what I believe. And it's having an openness. And that type of humility then blended with confidence. And confidence is something we earn. Confidence is something we earn through demonstrated performance. Confidence is something we earn through our self-narrative and our self-talk. Do we talk to ourselves in an empowering, compassionate way? Or do we talk to ourselves in a judgmental and critical way? Confidence is also earned by honoring the promises we make to ourselves. If you tell yourself you're going to get up at 5 a.m. and go for a walk, and you do, you will strengthen your confidence because you are doing what you said you would do. If instead you hit the snooze button and pull the covers over your head and you don't go for a walk, you will start to erode your confidence. So blending confidence with humility and combining discipline with consistency and putting all of that on top of the foundation of self-awareness, well, that's how you start to create momentum. That's how you start to level up your life. That is how you start to improve your performance and your productivity. Is people tend to think that good decisions and good outcomes are inextricably linked, that if you get a good outcome, then it was a good decision. Or if you get a bad outcome, then it was a bad decision. And while they are related, and there is some utility between the two, that's not the exact relationship that they have. It is very possible to make a very good decision and still get a very bad outcome. It's equally possible to make a very poor decision and luckily get a good outcome. Now, with that being said, I will fully acknowledge that if you tend to make mostly good decisions in your life, my guess is you'll get a lot of really good outcomes. So like I said, those two things are linked, but they're not necessarily cause and effect. And the reason this is so important is part of my operating system, if you will, as I navigate this world, is I try to focus on the things I have control over, and I try to let go of the things that I don't. And with this analogy here, I have control over my decisions, but I do not have control over my outcomes. So by definition, those two things are separate. And I just want to make sure that I'm doing everything in my power to make the best and most informed decisions I can as consistently as possible. Now, I don't hold myself to an ideal of perfection, which is good because I'm far from perfect, but life is not a perfect game. Basketball is not a perfect game. Business is not a perfect game. Sales is not a perfect game. Relationships is not a perfect game. So I don't worry about perfection, but I do focus on making the best decisions that I'm capable of as consistently as possible. And I want to make good decisions, whether they're large or small, whether they're personal or professional, whether they're individual or organizational, whether they're personal business, it doesn't matter. I want to get in the habit of making good decisions. And for me, I will define a good decision as, using the information that I have, is being fully aware, being intentional, being purposeful. A good decision is one where my head, my heart, and my gut are all in alignment. And if I make a decision based on intention and purpose and awareness, I make a decision based on the information that I have, I've done my due diligence, I make a decision where my head, my heart, and my gut are in alignment, then to me, that is a good decision regardless of outcome. Now, on the other side of that, and trust me, I've made plenty of these decisions. If I'm making a decision based on fear, if I'm making a decision based on my insecurities, if I'm making a decision based on my ego, if I'm making a decision based on impatience, then by definition, it is probably a poor decision regardless of outcome. And one of the things that started to stimulate this thought, there's been a few, a couple of them are examples with my children, and then a couple of them are some things that have been happening in the news lately. Let's talk about the one with my kids first. So I have almost 15-year-old twin sons, Luke and Jack, and I have a 12-year-old daughter, Lila. And all three of my children play youth basketball, and they're pretty good little players. And after a game, this was a couple months ago now, but after a game, my son Luke was visibly disappointed in how he played. And I was at the game and I watched, and I kind of had an idea of why he felt that way. But, I want to teach my children how to be aware of and express and own their emotions. So I asked them why it appeared that he was disappointed and frustrated. And he said very honestly, well, I didn't play well. And again, I had watched the game, so I had my own evaluation, but I wanted to pull on that string a little harder. So I said, well, why don't you think you played well? And he said, because I missed most of my shots. And full stop. That was his definition of playing well. He missed most of his shots. Now, I have nothing but love and empathy and compassion for my son. And when I was his age, I would have felt the exact same way, and I would have given the exact same answer. But now that I'm a little older, or a lot older, and hopefully wiser, I have a different thought process. So I asked Luke for permission to share some thoughts on how I think he should define playing well. And he was open to it. So we had a really lovely discussion. And basically, I asked him a series of questions. I asked him if he played as hard as he was capable of playing. And he said, yeah, I probably could play a little bit harder. But yeah, Dad, I played hard. Okay, that's great. That's a check. I asked him if he was a good teammate. What was he being unselfish? Was he cheering his teammates on? And he said, yeah, I was a good teammate. Check. And so far, since I was at the game watching, I agree with both of those evaluations. I then asked him if he listened to his coach. Did he run the plays the coach called for? Did he do everything the coach asked? Did he listen to the coach with his eyes? Was he respectful? He said, yeah, Dad, of course. I'm always coachable. Awesome. There's a third check. And then I said, did you take good shots? I know that you missed most of your shots. And just for reference, I think he was 2 for 9. He made 2 shots and missed 7. But I said, did you take good shots? And he said, well, with the exception of one, and I remember which one it was, he said, yeah, I think I took good shots. And I said, all right, so 8 out of the 9 shots you took were good shots. And for those that don't follow basketball, you have to understand this. By definition, a shot is either good or bad the moment it's taken. It has nothing to do with whether it goes in or not. A shot is good or bad the moment it's taken. And whether or not it's a good shot has to do with things like, were you wide open? Were you in range? Were you in rhythm? Was it appropriate based on the time and score? Did a teammate have a better shot? And if you can answer a positive manner for each of those, then it was a good shot to take. But very similar to what I was mentioning between good decisions and good outcomes is you can take good shots and miss them. At the same time, you can take really bad shots where you're heavily guarded. It's a bad shot versus time and score. You're out of your range. You got your head down, you're dribbling, and you just throw up a prayer and it can still go in. That doesn't mean it was a good shot. So basically, Luke said, yeah, 8 out of the 9 shots he took were good shots. And I said, okay, buddy. So just so you know, according to this checklist, you played as hard as you could play. You were a good teammate. You were coachable. You made good decisions and you took good shots. So by my definition, buddy, you played well. Now, you might not have gotten the outcome you wanted. You might not have made the shots that you wanted. You might have, preferred to have made more shots. Understandable. But I just want you to understand the difference, when it comes to defining how you play. And I want you to understand the difference between good shots and bad shots, good decisions and bad decisions. So that was one example that really got me thinking on this topic. Another was, I'm divorced, so I only have my kids half the time. And when my kids come stay with me, one of the things we've really enjoyed doing recently is playing blackjack. Now, I'm not really a card shark. I don't know a lot about cards or blackjack or poker, but I certainly understand the premise. And when my kids come over and I bought a card table and a professional shuffler and a couple decks of cards and some poker chips, and we actually play for $1 a chip, so there's some skin in the game. But the only real difference between the card game I run here in my apartment and say the casino at the Wynn in Las Vegas is we're allowed to use the blackjack grid, the sheet that tells you mathematically whether you should hit or stay based on what you have and based on what the dealer shows. And this grid has been literally devised mathematically. And it's a grid that will show, here's what you have, here's what the dealer shows, either hit or stay. And generally speaking, if you follow the grid, it's mathematically in your best interest, more times than not, it will come out in your favor. So by definition, following the grid is a good decision. even if you lose the hand, even if you bust, even if the dealer wins, if you followed the grid, it's a good decision. Now, when you decide to go rogue, when you decide to take a hunch, or you feel like you're on a heater, when you play with emotion, as anyone will tell you who does gamble, that's usually a slippery slope. When you think you know more than the math, it's usually not a good decision. Now, of course, you can go with your gut and you can actually win. But just because you won doesn't mean it was a good decision. And I was trying to explain this to my daughter, Lila, because there were a few times in a row where she did exactly what the grid said, but she ended up losing the hand. And she said something to the effect of, I don't know why I'm following this thing because I keep losing. I might as well just do my own thing. And that's when we had this discussion. And very similar to my conversation with my son, Luke, I had with my daughter, Lila, and said, no, just because you've lost 3 hands in a row doesn't mean they were bad decisions. Doesn't mean you still played the odds. You did what you were mathematically and statistically advised to do. You just didn't get the outcome that you wanted. So that's that separation between, good outcomes and good decisions. At the time of this recording, I got back from the Bahamas late last night. I spent 5 days there with my 3 teenage children, Luke, Jack, and Lila, for their spring break. And I got to be honest, it was the best vacation that I've ever taken. It was definitely the most connected trip that I've had with my children. And a lot of that has to do with their current age. My twin sons, Luke and Jack, just turned 15 last month, and my daughter will be turning 13 in June. So at that teenage, age and space, they're little people. And, we had some really great conversations. The weather was terrific. The Airbnb was phenomenal. Everything we experienced was awesome. And for any of you that follow me on social, you probably saw a couple of those posts. But a few things about the vacation that I wanted to share. The first is, as a general parenting rule for me, I try to give my kids as much autonomy as possible. I really encourage them to make the vast majority of the decisions in their life. They decide, how they want their haircut. They decide what to wear. They decide what to eat, or if to eat, or when to eat. I don't micromanage my children. I want them to have the autonomy and the agency to make decisions, but I just constantly remind them that, they're not free from the consequences of those decisions. That you have the power to choose, but then you absolutely have to live by the consequences of your decisions and choices. But I'm sharing that for a different reason. So really, from the get-go, as a divorced father, I alternate spring breaks with their mom. So this was my year to have them. Next year, they'll be with her. And then the year after, again, they'll be with me. So as soon as I knew that I would have my kids for this spring break, I gave them the freedom to choose where to go and what we were going to do. And they chose the Bahamas, and they chose the boat trip that we took so we could do some fishing and go to the Island of Pigs. They chose to go to the Atlantis for the day. They chose to stay in an Airbnb, and we cooked some different dinners. So I really gave them a lot of choice. And here's the other thing about when you give someone autonomy, whether this is your children or this is even in a work environment, when someone has a voice and a say and helps co-create the work that's being done, co-create the future, if you will, then they have more buy-in and they have more believe in. This was not a vacation where I said where we're going, I said what we're going to do, and everyone get on board and enjoy it. The kids basically picked every aspect of the vacation. If they wanted to sleep in, I let them sleep in. If they wanted to go to the beach, we went to the beach. If they wanted to come home from the beach, we came home from the beach. I got in a daily workout, but I didn't make them join me. I offered them an opportunity to join me, and they did. And I just share that because it's a great reminder to let people have a voice and to let people have a say in the work they're doing and then the future they're trying to create. So that worked out beautifully. And I'll also say this, I tell a couple of stories on stage about my teenage sons, Luke and Jack. And, at that age, they do pick at each other a little bit. They're competitive with each other. They tease each other. They call each other names. They physically push and fight and wrestle. And I found myself saying this sentence several times during vacation, and it makes me laugh. The kids, of course, roll their eyes at me. Before I share that, let me just say that I don't have a lot of rules as a father. I believe rules confine people. And as I've already said, I don't want to confine. I don't want to micromanage. I don't want to dictate my children. I want to offer as much free space and grace as possible for them to make decisions. And of course, I try to model the behavior that I hope they choose to emulate, but nothing is ever forced. So like I said, I don't have a lot of rules. I mean, really, the baseline of what it is that I require from my children is to always be respectful and always be honest. Those are really the only rules that I have. Now it would be my preference that my children choose to give their best effort and choose to have a great attitude. But those aren't even requirements. Those are just things that I try to model. But lots of times when the boys were starting to pick at each other and argue, or when they would tease their sister, I would just say, if it's not kind, respectful, or helpful, don't say it out loud. And like I said, I probably said that a dozen times over our 5 days there when I heard the boys fighting. If it's not kind, respectful, or helpful, don't say it out loud. And I say with a wink and all the love in my heart, that's pretty good advice for all of us. There's no reason to speak something into existence, and there's certainly no reason to say something to another human being unless it's kind, respectful, and helpful. If you're ever looking to make a change in your life, and there's two types of change. There's the change that is imposed upon us, things like the COVID, things like these tariffs and things that are happening in the world right now. These are things outside of our control that is imposed on us. But the other type of change is initiated change, is change that we choose to make. And what I find fascinating is the decision to change something in your life happens immediately. It happens in a moment. It's almost like a switch goes off. When you decide to make a change, that is something that happens in a moment. However, the actual change is going to take much longer than that. The actual change, depending on what it is going to take, at the very short end, days or weeks, at the long end, months, years, or possibly decades. But the only way that change will end up happening is if you are super consistent. So from the moment you decide to change, then you need to make sure that you are changing your behaviors, changing your thought processes, changing your perspectives, changing your approaches. That needs to be something that you do consistently every single day. And there's always going to be a gap. There's going to be a gap from when you decide to change to when you actually see the change. And as I said, that gap can be as short as a couple of days or a couple of weeks, can be as long as a couple of months or a couple of years. But the real successful people, the people that perform at the highest level, that produce at the highest level, are the ones that are okay during that gap, are the ones that consistently show up, put in the work, get in the repetitions during that gap where they're not seeing the results. We can use fitness as an example. It's the person that keeps showing up to the gym every single day, although they haven't necessarily noticed any physical changes to their body yet. See, what the average person does is they make the decision to change. They start doing the new behaviors. And then after a couple of days or a couple of weeks, when things haven't changed drastically, they give up and they quit. And they say, well, this isn't working. Well, that's when you need consistency. That's when you need to drill down on being consistent. And those that can weather the storm, those that are able to show up every single day, put in the work, get in the reps, despite not seeing any results in the moment, those are the ones that are eventually going to hit pay dirt. Those are the ones that are eventually going to hit their goal. The example's been used before, but it's such a good one. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's kind of like chopping down a large tree. You're hitting the tree with the axe over and over and over, and it doesn't seem like anything is happening. And then on maybe the 100th hit, the tree actually falls down. And it wasn't the 100th hit that chopped down the tree. It was the 99 hits before that allowed the 100th hit to knock down the tree. And those 99 hits where you're hitting it with the axe and you're not seeing any progress, you're not seeing the tree even waver, that's the consistency that's required. So if you want to be successful in anything, you've got to be okay living in that gap. The gap between the decision to change and the consistency required to actually see the change. There's nothing inherently wrong with playing the comparison game. There's nothing wrong with comparing anything, honestly. Where we run into trouble is what we do with that information. Where we run into trouble and create issues is what is our interpretation or the meaning behind the comparison, and how do we internalize it? And the number one question I would ask anytime you're playing the comparison game is, how does it make you feel? And to make this intentionally kind of, to put it into two buckets, generally speaking for myself, and that's all I'll do is speak in the first person, is when I compare myself or my life or my performance or my results or anything to someone else, there's only one of two things that I'm going to feel. If it makes me feel less than, if it makes me feel like I'm not good enough, this other person is doing something better than me and that makes me feel less than, that needs to be a major red flag, because I don't want to do anything in my life that's consistently making me feel less than. However, if I use comparison as a way of inspiration, as a way of motivation, as a way of having a target of something I'm trying to reach for or stretch for, then I actually think comparison can be a very helpful tool. And of course, I'm talking about comparison of yourself to maybe someone else or something else. I'm a huge believer in using comparison of previous versions of myself to present versions of myself. I like to compare who I was a year ago to who I am today, or my level of mastery of a certain craft a year ago to what I can do today. So comparison with myself is something I've always found value in, but now I just want to take this new angle on comparison with others. And I think what's most important is really getting a grip on what it is that you're actually comparing. And once again, I'm only here to share. I'm only here to offer some insight into how I choose to navigate the world and what things I use in my own operating system. I'm not here to say that these are necessarily advice or recommendations, but hopefully just food for thought for each of you. And for me, I try not to compare outcomes and results. I try not to compare, how many social followers I have to someone else, how many books I've sold to someone else, what my keynote fee is to someone else, the types of vacations I take to someone else. I try not to compare outcomes and results. But for me, where I do draw inspiration and motivation is by comparing processes, comparing systems, comparing discipline, comparing consistency. I try and compare not results, but I try to compare traits. So, for example, if there's somebody that I follow on Instagram who I really enjoy their content, I'm not comparing how many followers or likes or views did they get versus what I get. That's not super helpful. What I do try and compare is what type of content did they put out? How helpful and meaningful and influential and impactful is the stuff that they put out? What's the style or format of the stuff that they put out? How actionable and practical is the stuff that they put out? How consistently are they putting it out? How professional is the stuff that they're putting it out? And those might be the yardsticks that I want to measure my own content with, and say, hey, do I have room to improve in my consistency? Do I have room to improve in my professionalism? Do I have room to improve in the practicality or the applicability of what it is that I'm putting out? Is this stuff useful? And, so it's not measuring the external metrics, but it's actually measuring the substance. Same thing as a keynote speaker. I try not to concern myself with what other people are charging and what stages they're on, what brands they're speaking for, and how many engagements are they doing. I might be aware of those things, but I try not to use them as a point of comparison. But instead I say, what's their level of mastery of their keynote? How impactful is their delivery on stage? How insightful and on point is their actual content? So when I have speakers, and there's a whole host of speakers that I really admire and respect, once again, I'm not comparing the external trappings. I'm comparing their level of mastery of their craft to my level of mastery and pursuit of my craft. And for me, I actually find those things very inspiring. That stuff never leaves me feeling less than. It actually excites me to continue to put in the work, to deserve the right to be successful in these different domains. But this leads me to kind of the second half of this topic or theme, and that's what's what's the reference point at which you're comparing? And there's a few thoughts that I have on this. Ultimately, everything that we could compare, there has to be some type of reference point because everything is on a spectrum. Let's just say, for example, even if we're talking about restaurants and someone says, well, that restaurant is expensive. Well, that's a sliding scale because expensive, well, compared to what? If that restaurant is compared to McDonald's, then yeah, it probably feels very expensive. If that restaurant is compared to, a Michelin star restaurant in New York City, then it's probably not. So you can't really paint it with the picture of that is expensive. It's all a matter of what the reference point is. As I'm recording this, Duke won a big game against Arizona last night. I'm a huge Duke basketball fan, so they just advanced to the Elite Eight and an opportunity to play Alabama tomorrow. And Duke always has had kind of a polarizing following. You've got the Duke diehards and people that love the Blue Devils, like myself. And then you've got a host of people, many times UNC fans, who can't stand Duke. They don't like Duke, and they say things like Duke sucks. And it's like, all right, well, once again, you can't really make that blanket statement. By what reference point or criteria are you possibly saying that Duke sucks? Yeah. Are there times where they have a less than stellar year, a less than a Final Four run or a championship year? Yeah, of course. But they've also created a standard that is so high that anything short of that can often be viewed as a failure of a year, a failure of a season. And someone would say, well, Duke sucks. It's even going back to kind of the reference point of, if you take, I believe there's around 340 men's basketball programs in Division I, give or take. My math might be off a little bit, or the number might be off. And you could take the very worst men's basketball program in Division I, number 340, and in theory, they're still better than every Division II, Division III, NAIA, JUCO college team. Now, again, I'm not trying to argue the semantics. Is there a Division II team that would beat them? Of course, but I'm just saying in theory. So you could take someone that is the worst team in Division I, and yet they're still in the upper 20% of all of college basketball in theory. You can take the worst player on the worst team in college basketball, and they're still better than 99% of anyone that has ever dribbled a basketball. Because statistically, less than 1% of people that start playing basketball as kindergartners and first graders are going to end up playing in college. So again, it's a reference point. The worst player on the worst team is better than 99% of anyone that has ever played the sport. So it's just important to keep these things in mind. And, I keep this in mind for myself because what I choose to do is I intentionally choose my reference points to be pretty elite level, and another one would say, as an author, there's tons of authors out there, Mel Robbins, James Clear, they're unicorns that they've sold millions and millions and millions of books. Not many books are able to do that. My first book, Raise Your Game, is done fairly well. It's something I'm incredibly proud of. It hasn't done Mel Robbins well. It hasn't done Ryan Holiday well. It hasn't done David Goggins well. And that's okay, because I don't play that comparison. All I look at is, did I write the best book I was capable of at that time? And did I write it in service of the folks that I would hope would read it? And after that, I have to kind of let go of any type of comparison. Now, I just finished the manuscript to a third book that will be out in November, and I'm very proud of that book. I think it's it's the best work that I've done to date. But at the time I wrote Raise Your Game, 6 years ago, that was the best I was capable of at that time. So for me, the comparison is not about comparing me to Mel Robbins or James Clear. The comparison is Alan Stein Jr. in 2018 when I wrote Raise Your Game compared to Alan Stein Jr. in 2025 when I've written this new book. And have I gotten better at the craft of writing? Have I gotten better at the ability to articulate a point of view and to organize my thoughts? So to me, that's really important. But I just bring this concept up of reference point because you need to be aware of it. Anytime you're making any type of comparison amongst anything, you have to be aware of what the reference point is that you're using. And back to the books, I know I said that I'm not comparing external metrics, and I'm really not, but just to put into context, and this kind of will back up the point that I was making about the worst basketball player on the worst team in Division I is still better than 99% of people that have ever dribbled a basketball. I saw I guess some research that was online, so I cannot confirm the validity of it, but it said that 96% of every book that has ever been written won't sell 500 copies. So think about that for a second. 96% of every book that has ever been written has not sold 500 copies. Well, I'm grateful that Raise Your Game has sold more than 500 copies. So just by that stat alone, Raise Your Game is in the top 4% of every book that's ever been sold. That's kind of cool. But that's not really the reference point that I'm not using that as my measuring stick. I was just simply sharing that as something to kind of hammer home this point. Whenever I do find myself playing the comparison game, there's only two things that I'm trying to focus on. One is when I'm making that comparison, how is it making me feel? And what is it that I'm actually comparing? As long as it's not making me feel less than, it's actually making me feel inspired, then then playing the comparison game can actually be beneficial. And then the second part is, what is it that I'm actually comparing? Am I comparing my results and my outcomes, which for me doesn't work real well? Or am I comparing traits? Am I comparing processes? Am I comparing systems? Am I comparing things I want to emulate? That's something that does serve me. And then the red thread that ties all of that together is, what is the reference point I'm using when I'm making this comparison? I think it's important to be able to zoom in and zoom back out, in order to make sure that comparison is accurate and that comparison is helpful. Alan, what suggestions do you have if you're not making decisions aligned with who you want to be 1 or 3 years from now? Well, first of all, I appreciate you asking the question and having the awareness to ask the question. And awareness is always the first step, because you will never fix something you're unaware of, and you'll never improve something you're oblivious to. So I really commend you for taking that first step, Jared. And that's what I'd say. So there's kind of a 4-step process. The first is an awareness. You have to be aware of what it is that you need to fix. And then in the reconditioning process, you need to exercise some discipline to do something differently than you've done it before. Then you need to have some consistency, because it needs to be something that you make the commitment to do most of the time, and something that needs to be done daily. And then the fourth pillar is always been my biggest personal struggle, and that is patience. As I said, you have to be willing to lay the right bricks and the right foundation and plant the right seeds consistently and with discipline and with a high level of awareness, even if you're not seeing those benefits. So if you're not currently making decisions that are aligned with who you want to be, we need to look at both sides of the equation. First of all, I would say, Jared, are you crystal clear on who you want to be 1 or 3 years from now? Who do you want to be as a partner or a spouse? Who you want to be if you're a father or a caretaker? Who do you want to be in your community? Who do you want to be from a health and fitness standpoint? Who do you want to be financially? Who do you want to be in your vocation, whatever it is that you do? And get crystal clear on who you want to be in each of those aspects of your life. And then you need to start reverse engineering and figure out, okay, in business, they'd be called KPIs, key performance indicators. You need to say, all right, if my goal is to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit 1 year from now, well, what are some of the markers that would determine if I am physically, mentally, or emotionally fit? And then unpack that some more and say, all right, well, what are the types of behaviors, decisions, actions, or process would I need to implement to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit? And you can apply this to any area. If your goal is to improve your financial situation, all right, well, what are some of the metrics that would measure my financial success, and figure what those are. And then reverse engineer those and unpack those and say, all right, well, what are the behaviors, the decisions, and the actions that I need to make to reach each of those kind of benchmarks for being, financially fit, if you will. And then that's how we get to the bottom layer, which are these daily behaviors and these daily decisions. And then we just want to try to get as many of them as possible to align with the person that we're trying to become. Don't worry about perfection. None of us, myself very much included, makes perfect decisions or has perfect habits or is leading a perfect life. Nothing could be further from the truth. But what all of us can get inspired by and be motivated by is progress. That's why the cliche progress over perfection, is making its rounds around social media. And there's a lot of truth to it. So get crystal clear on what it is you want to improve. Get crystal clear on how you measure whether or not you're making progress. Get equally clear on the behaviors and the actions and the disciplines and the decisions you need to make to have those things happen. And then put a framework in place to try to implement those on a daily basis. Now, to really get granular and to hopefully answer your question, Jared, there is a 3-step formula to each of those behaviors. So let's just say, you want to improve your physical fitness, so you'll have more energy and you'll just feel better. You'll sleep better. You'll perform better. You'll have better critical thinking. Well, the 3-step formula for improving a singular behavior is first and foremost is picking just one behavior or one action to put in place. I love quotes. I'm a designated quote nerd, a self-diagnosed quote nerd. And one of my favorite quotes is, if you chase 2 rabbits, they'll both get away. So I want you to get singularly focused on one behavior that you're going to focus on. Then step 2 of that, Jared, is I want you to make a commitment to yourself to do that thing for the next 66 days. Most of the research out there involving strengthening habits or creating new habits says it takes about 66 days to groove a new behavior. Could be plus or minus, a couple of weeks, but I like that number because it's somewhat arbitrary. It's very easy to remember and it's doable. It's hard, but it's doable, just a hair over 2 months. And then the third step is recruit a few people, Jared, that are in your inner circle, people that love you and care about you and want to see you successful. And I want you to tell them about this singular behavior that you're going to try to improve. I want you to tell them that you're committed to doing it every day for the next 66 days, but you need their help. You need them to hold you accountable. You need them to check in with you every single day and ask you if you've done that thing. So if I unpack all of that, here's how it'll look. In all of the different, areas of your life, Jared, you decide that you want to improve your physical fitness. You believe it'll help you look better, feel better, perform better. It'll level up every area of your life. Well, with that, you're going to decide, what does that look like? Like, what are some measurements of being physically fit? And that is for you to determine. That's not for me to determine. Maybe it's a certain body weight. Maybe it's a certain body fat percentage. Maybe it's the ability to run a mile under a certain time or do a certain number of pull-ups, whatever it may be. But get some type of idea of what are the KPIs of what you would deem being physically fit means. And then you unpack each of those and say, all right, well, someone that is at this body fat or at this weight or can run a mile in this time or can do this many pull-ups, what are the daily decisions and behaviors and actions that person would be living out in order to achieve those? Like, what decisions would you make from a nutrition standpoint? What decisions would you make from a sleep standpoint? What decisions would you make from an exercise standpoint? And start getting crystal clear on those behaviors. And then to really fine tune it, I just want you to pick one of them and go after that one relentlessly for the next 66 days. And then ask the people that love you and care about you to hold you accountable to doing that thing. And if you stick with that, in 2 months, you'll see a marked improvement in that specific behavior. That'll just be something that is now one of your habits. And now that habit is in alignment with your behavior, which is in alignment with how you would measure being physically fit, which is in alignment with being physically fit. And if you can stick with that and then eventually stack other habits on top of that, then 1 year or 3 years from now, you will be physically fit. I hope that helps. I know that was a mouthful, but hopefully breaking it down that way, gives you something tangible to actually put in place. If you know of a team, a business, an event, or organization that would benefit from a message like this, or you know of a group that needs help getting back to the basics, focusing on the fundamentals, and simplifying success, please have them visit alansteinjr.com.